So today, let us briefly discuss about the G20 or G100 meeting that is taking place in South Africa currently. And most importantly, the refusal by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, to attend the meeting. What does it mean? And most importantly as well, the invitation extended to the African Union to formally join the meeting. What does it mean for us as African people? That is what we are going to talk. But before that, I invite you to kindly subscribe to our channel and like the video as well in order to make our voice strong, because our voice is the voice of the people. So it means your contribution and your participation is very important. Peace and love, freedom and decolonization to all African people, those at home, those abroad, and those in the future. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, please sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is no longer on the streets. This revolution is in the mind, because if we are not in charge of our mind, the enemy will take charge of our bodies and use it as the tools of self-enslavement and self-oppression. So once again, welcome to our weekly rendezvous where we talk about us and about our reality. My name is King Kabbalah from the African Continental Unity Party. Please receive our revolutionary greetings. Now, as announced, we are going to talk about the G20, as I said, or G100 meeting taking place in South Africa today as we're speaking. And I said, most importantly, the invitation, formal invitation by the South African as the leading partner in this meeting to the African Union, which means to all African people, to join the gathering. This is mostly seen by many people as a sign of inclusion, of unity that we want in the world. But as a Pan-African revolutionaries, what do we think about this? What do we say about this? This is what we are going to unpack in this presentation. The aim is to make the unconscious conscious. That is the duty of any revolutionary, is firstly to make the unconscious conscious, which means to make people responsible of critical thinking as well as of critical actions, which is proper for our liberation and emancipation. Now, before we begin anything, I want to lay down a foundational statement which will allow us to unpack these events. The statement is, African continent, as we're speaking right now, is a land of domination, which means is a land and the people who have been dominated by the powerful nations in the world through slavery, colonialism, and today neocolonialism. And domination always gives way to oppression, because you cannot dominate people that you don't want to oppress, and you cannot oppress people unless you have dominated them. Now, within this struggle or within this reality of domination and oppression, the only thing that is relevant to African people is liberation. Now, the important question is, how do we go about getting this liberation? Hence, we see a lot of techniques, strategies, one of which is to integrate, to join the G20. The G20, which is a group of powerful countries that have come together and meeting regularly in order to set the agenda of the future, and that agenda, which is always consistent with their logic to dominate and exploit and oppress the weaker countries. And that is what the G20 is. That's the reason why it said is a group of 20 countries or 20 strong economies in the world. And 20 strong economies simply means 20 strong nations who have been able to keep their upper hand on Africa, its politics, its economy, its reality, so forth and so on, in order to keep us in a state of domination, right? And for you to understand this reality of domination, you just have to look at the statistics. Africa produces literally 46% of the global wealth, literally. But that wealth of Africa is mostly manifested in the standards of life of people in Europe, in these countries who are members of G20 formally, And the life of African people is mostly reflected through misery, hunger, deprivation, so forth and so on. And I think we all are witness to that. So this is where some of you may think then, okay, G20 is not simply European countries, they are all other countries who are not, oppressive or colonialist. That is true, but the point is, strong countries, equally as rich people, may not always agree with the policies or strategies of exploitation and oppression that European countries have used. But one thing they agree uh, undoubtedly on is how to keep their power unchallenged, unquestioned, and how to keep their wealth, growing. And that's one thing for sure. China cannot disagree about whether China is imperialistic or not. The point is, Chinese people are more interested on how to keep their power unchallenged, unquestioned, and how to keep prospering. And on that basis, they agree with setting an agenda which promotes their development, their growth, and as a consequence of that, we see the oppression, the exploitation, the plunder, which we all witness on the continent. So, the most important thing that we are discussing here is the integration of African Union, the invitation of African Union to join the G20, which, as I said, is a group, technically a group of countries that have been meeting on yearly basis to set an agenda of the future, which is basically about oppressing and domination. I said domination is always a gate that leads towards oppression. Now I'm going to use here an analysis made by Paulo Freire in his book The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He argued that the oppression always produce a duality in the minds of an oppressed. In other words, when you do a psychoanalysis of any oppressed person for a long time, as we have been as African people, you will find that these people suffer from what is called the duality, right, of being. They have housed in them a part of their oppressor, the ideal of their oppressor, and themselves at the same time. That's why they live in a kind of duality, which always result in a confusion or an imbalance or what is called ambivalence of objectives, in a way that at the same time they seek to be the oppressor. They seek to imitate the oppressor, to integrate the oppressor, to be with the oppressor, to live with them, right? At the same time, they want to be free from their oppressor. So, this attraction of the oppressed toward his oppressor, and at the same time, his desire to be free, is what is called dualism, that always produce confusion in the minds of an oppressed person so that they don't sometimes position well their goals and their objectives, even pursue them. That is what explains the enthusiasm and excitement by African Union to join the G20. Because, as I said, G20 is technically a group of powerful countries who have been setting an agenda which can be seen as an agenda to dominate and exploit Africa. And now African Union wants to join that organization or that group or that meeting. The question that we need to ask is, do we expect to be free? Because, as I said, the most important question for us is the liberation. So here the question is, do we expect to achieve this liberation by integrating the G20 meeting? That's the question that you and I have to answer individually as we look at this reality. But most importantly, what Paulo Freire argued further is that the oppressed and the oppressors are antithetical, which means that what serves the interest of one group cannot serve the interest of the other group. What is an advantage to one group is a disadvantage to another group. So, in other words, when the oppressed want liberation, that liberation is looked as a threat by the oppressor. That is what explains the antithetical nature of the relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor. So now you have a reality whereby the African Union, which represents the oppressed entity, get to integrate a G20 meeting, which is a group of the countries that have been, or that can be looked as the group of oppressors, all right, of Africans. Do we expect really to achieve our liberation through this gathering, or it is just another symbolism or another satisfaction of our need to belong, but not really to be? This is what we need to analyze as revolutionaries. I think most people look at this as inclusion, cooperation, solidarity in the world, so forth and so on, all those beautiful words. The end goal, the end result, when it comes to our desire for liberation and emancipation from the oppression of these powerful countries and their exploitation, what will that be in terms of this integration of African Union in the G20? Or even if tomorrow it happens that African Union now has been integrated in the G7, or even in the NATO, so forth and so on, what will be the results? Are we able to achieve our liberation through the integration, or we are able to achieve the liberation through the struggle? This is the very important question. I think I'm asking all these questions to make a point. And the point is the G20 for Africa can be helpful only in the sense that the domination logic and oppression logic of Western countries who are members of this meeting is eradicated. In other words, only if there's no logic to oppress or to continue oppressing, to continue dominating, to continue exploiting Africa within the members of the G20, then the G20 can become a platform whereby Africans, as well as all the rest of the world, can come together on equal foots and set an agenda of tomorrow, which is not based on domination and exploitation of others. But the thing is, the refusal of the United States to take part in this meeting signifies that the logic of domination has not ceased. In other words, Donald Trump believes that the G20 should continue to serve the interest of powerful countries and powerful economies. Therefore, there's no need to invite all these other countries that South Africa has invited. In other words, the Americans look at the G20 as it is taking place in South Africa now as a pollution to their agenda, or to a group which was primarily aimed at setting an agenda of powerful countries for the world. Now it has to integrate all these countries who are not powerful, who have no voice, who have no idea of what they have to do because of the duality that I have explained. So the refusal by the United States to participate in this meeting explains exactly their refusal to stop the logic of domination and oppression, because the meeting is taking place now. It's aimed to be taking place on equal foot. Even the theme is about solidarity and the future that we want, inclusion, so forth and so on. And this is not what Americans want when it comes to when it comes to the G20. For them, it has to be the tools, the instrument through which the ideas or the ideals of powerful countries can be materialized in the entire world. So this is what we have to understand. So in this regard, it is clearly true to argue that the G20 cannot serve the African liberation. I think when it comes to our liberation today, there's only way to go about it, and that is the way of struggle. And that is what Dr. John Henry Clark said, that only a slave can abolish slavery, because if you are sitting with the Lord on your shoulder, people sitting on you, it's only up to you to balance yourself a little bit in order to adjust yourself a little bit in order to balance off the people who are sitting on your back, right? It's not about joining G20, joining G7, joining NATO, joining Bilderberg, joining all these organizations or institutions of oppression and domination. It's only us who can do that, the oppressed who can do that. And that is you and me, the African masses, the young people. So it is our time today to stand up, to organize, and redefine our reality in the world that we want to live in. It's a time that we have to create back the humanity which has been destroyed in us by the oppression. And the first thing that we need to do is to kill in us the desire, the attraction of the oppressor, is to destroy the duality in us which makes us attracted by our oppressor, to make us wanting to be like the oppressor, to live like the oppressor, to belong with the oppressor. When we kill this envy, this duality, then we are able to position ourselves as African people as the oppressed, and the only thing that will be clear to us, in front of us, is the liberation, and that's what we have to fight for, and that's will be done through unity and organization all across the continent of Africa. So that is our analysis as revolutionary thinkers. So what is yours? We don't know. Please put it in the comment. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace and love, freedom and decolonization to all African people, those at home, those abroad, and those in the future. Thank you for your time. See you next time. Bye-bye.